The Nebula Awards are voted on by writers, the people who shape science fiction and fantasy itself. I read every Nebula Award-winning book for Best Novel from the 1990s, so which ones still hold up and which ones are better left in the past? The first winner was Tehanu by Ursula K. Le Guin. This is the fourth book of the Earthsea series, and it's not really a standalone book. You should read the first three books to really understand and appreciate it. I'll be talking about the general plot, so it will include some spoilers from the earlier books. This book picks up right after The Farthest Shore, which is the third book, and then also features Tanar as a prominent character who was first introduced in the second book. What's interesting is that this book was published 20 years after the first. You can definitely tell the general atmosphere of this book is much more reserved and mature compared to any of the previous books. The three main characters are Tanar, Ged, and Thuru, and they're a little bit unusual in the genre in the fact that Tanar is an aging woman, Ged is a broken former archmage who no longer is able to use magic, and then Thuru is a traumatized girl. Tanar has to reckon with the life she chose as a housewife and the life she might have had if she'd chosen a different path. Ged is no longer a wizard, and in some ways he's become more of a man than before, but he's struggling with what that means and how it feels to live without the power he once had. And Thuru is a young child who was heavily abused both physically and otherwise. So all three main characters are damaged in their own ways, and they're trying to find their place in the world while surviving the enemies nearby. The setting is on a much smaller scale than classic Earthsea adventures. And what I find special here is that the story doesn't focus on powerful mages, dragons, or quests for adventure. Instead, it centers on characters from previous books after they've been stripped of their power, asking them uncomfortable questions about who they are and forcing them to reflect on the lives they've lived. This is one of my favorite books and I highly recommend it, though you do need to read the first three before you really appreciate it. 1991, Stations of the Tide by Michael Swanwick. Our main protagonist is an unnamed bureaucrat from the Division of Technology Transfer, and he's dropped onto a planet to track down a renegade magician suspected of stealing prescribed technology. This planet he's dropped on is days away from a flood that occurs every 200 years that will drown all livable areas, and it'll force a mass evacuation. The individual named Gregorian who stole this technology, he might actually be able to prevent the flood from occurring by using the technology he stole, but using it would upset the planet's ecosystem and natural order. And that plays into one of the central ideas running through the story. It's the concept of restricting a group's access to technology. In Star Trek, there's a similar idea called the Prime Directive. Prohibiting advanced technology can preserve a way of life and culture, but it can also lower quality of life, allowing illness to go uncured or disasters like the planet's flood to occur unchecked. Arthur C. Clarke has a quote, "Any advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic." And I think this is what Swanwick is going for, because a lot of the book is deliberately ambiguous with technology and magic. It's usually described in a way where you kind of know what's going on, but it's also vague enough where you really aren't sure if what's being used is advanced technology or if it's magic. And this kind of makes the atmosphere very surreal. Most of the plot wrapped up in the end, but some of the character motivations and a few other things were still so ambiguous that I wasn't entirely sure what was going on and what happened. And the book, I think, is kind of reminiscent of something Samuel Delany might write, though it is more approachable. The book is hard to categorize. I didn't love it or hate it. It's definitely not an approachable entry point if you aren't already into sci-fi, but it does have a unique style I can see heavy sci-fi fans appreciating. 1992 Doomsday Book by Connie Willis. This won both the Hugo and Nebula Awards. I'm going to keep the reviews for this, Red Mars and Forever Peace a bit shorter since I covered them in my Hugo series. So it's set in a near future Oxford where historians use time travel to study the past firsthand. A graduate student is sent to medieval England, but a miscalculation leaves her stranded in the 14th century during the Black Death. With no way home, she struggles to survive as a plague spreads around her. And then, meanwhile in the present, a mysterious illness spreads through Oxford, disrupting the time travel system. The narrative moves back and forth between past and present as deadly disease spreads in both timelines. I think the setup is a little mediocre. I'm not sure why a history department would be given access to time travel. The characters are done pretty well, and then there's a fair amount of humor in the book that lands. Our main protagonist in the present is trying to figure out what went wrong, but he just has to deal with a bunch of people complaining about the pandemic measures that are being put in place. I do think the book drags in the middle with some of the jokes lingering too long. Overall, the book wasn't for me, but I do understand why people like it. 1993, Red Mars by Kim Stanley Robinson. This is the first book of the Mars trilogy, and it focuses on the initial 100 colonists sent to colonize Mars, and it alternates between a wide range of perspectives. Each character has a different vision of what Mars should be. Some are firmly anti-terraforming, believing the planet should remain untouched and studied, while others strongly support terraforming. And then there are some people who don't really care about the terraforming process at all, but they are more focused on governance, with some pushing for complete independence from Earth. This is one of the few books I could not finish. I made it a bit over halfway, but there's only so many times a desolate landscape can be described before it starts to feel repetitive. For a hard sci-fi novel, the planet also feels surprisingly easy to conquer. Colonizing it and solving its many problems often feels oddly straightforward. Most of the conflict comes not from a hostile environment, but from the disagreements over how technology should be used. So the characters end up posing more of a threat to each other than the planet does to them. And it's strange because you're constantly told how dangerous Mars is, but the real danger turns out to be the infighting between the colonists, which realistically wouldn't happen in the early stages of colonization because everybody would be too focused on trying to stay alive on Mars. I just don't think it's a book I would recommend, though it's a bit unfair to say that since I did not finish it. 1994, Moving Mars by Greg Bear. This is another book about Mars being colonized and it attempting to gain independence from Earth. Our main protagonist is Cassia. She becomes involved in Martian politics and she's pushing for the planet's independence from an increasingly controlling Earth, while also trying to avoid a war and make sure Mars has the resources they need to be independent. The first 2/3 of the novel are character-driven political science fiction, and then the final arc takes a sharp turn into a physics AI subplot, which does tie back into the main storyline. But the shift does feel a little jarring because the pace of the book felt like it was really slow and then it suddenly speeds up and the focus of the book shifts. Overall, I kind of put Moving Mars and Red Mars in the same category. I think they're just books not for me. 1995, The Terminal Experiment by Robert Sawyer. In a nutshell, it's a techno thriller about two people who create sentient AI, only to find themselves racing to track down and stop the one that's gone rogue and is now on a crime spree. The most interesting part of the book is it poses the question, what is the impact of knowing your computer program? And if a peaceful, non-violent person had a copy made of them, how would that copy behave once created? How would it behave knowing it's functionally immortal, just a program, and has no body? Would it still be peaceful and non-violent? Unfortunately, this question is only partly explored. The main focus centers around the interpersonal struggles of the characters. Our main protagonist, Peter, his wife cheats on him and he really struggles to come to terms with it. The book just spends a lot of time trying to make you care about the affair that occurs. Then there's some of the plot points that feel like sloppy writing. So our protagonist Peter just happens to be best friends with someone who's an expert in a completely different tech field and is able to use Peter's invention to help create artificial intelligence. Feels a little bit too convenient. And then these two extremely intelligent people somehow don't consider the danger of creating sentient AI. Overall, this is a book that might be a decent throwaway paperback you'd read at an airport, though it doesn't really stand up or feel like a Nebula award-winning book. 1996, Slow River by Nicola Griffith. Laura Van Oosterling is the heir to an incredibly wealthy family. After being kidnapped, she manages to escape, but because of her abusive family, she decides not to return home. Instead, she is taken in by Spanner, an underground criminal who helps her disappear and start a new life. The story is told across 3 different timelines. The main storyline follows Lore after her escape as she adjusts to life with Spanner. Then we get flashbacks to her childhood, which slowly reveal why she chose to abandon her old life in the first place. And then the 3rd timeline jumps further into the future, where Lore assumes the identity of a dead woman and starts over from scratch, eventually working as a wastewater treatment operator. Despite jumping between 3 timelines, I never had any trouble following what was going on. The initial character development did feel a little rushed. Spanner also reveals a lot of compromising personal information pretty quickly to what is basically a stranger. The book is unusual in the fact that I'm not really sure who the target audience is. The story focuses on 2 very different things. One is Lore's trauma, her relationships, and her love life, which include several lesbian set scenes. And the second thing the story really focuses on is the detailed process of operating a wastewater treatment plant. I don't think the book has aged badly, but the people who want to read about the lesbian relationship, I'm not sure if they're the same type of people that want to read about a wastewater treatment plant. And vice versa. 1997, The Moon and the Sun by Vonda McIntyre. This is an alternative history fantasy set at the court of Louis XIV of France. The king is obsessed with a captured sea creature that he believes holds the secret to immortality. Maria, our protagonist, is a young woman assigned to help study the creature, and she is the one who discovers that it's actually intelligent. It's effectively a person rather than a monster. The story follows Marie as she navigates the dangerous world of court politics, searching for a way to protect the sea creature and eventually secure its freedom. Along the way, she discovers that the world is far crueler than she imagined, and that many of the people she trusted have their own hidden motives. The biggest issue I had with the book is that it feels a little too predictable and cliche. Maria is the only person who sees the truth about the creature, that it's actually a mermaid with intelligence, emotions, and its own rights. I do think the court politics, the inclusion of real historical figures, and the slow building ethical dilemma surrounding the creature's captivity were all well done. But like I said, the overall plot and main character just felt a little too predictable for such a long book. There's a movie adaptation called The King's Daughter. I haven't watched it, but if you do watch the trailer, you'll get a pretty good sense of the overall tone and direction of the book and who it was written for. 1998, Forever Peace by Joe Halderman. The story centers on Julian, a soldier in an advanced military unit. The unit uses brain-computer interfaces to link soldiers together into a unified combat system, allowing them to share thoughts and collectively control robotic soldiers as part of a hive mind. The story follows him as he's deployed around the world, fighting wars using this advanced technology. The concept of hive mind technology that allows people to share a consciousness and control a robot or robots together is really cool. And then the book also explores how, as technology advances, destructive weapons become more accessible to smaller groups. A weapon that might cost hundreds of millions of dollars today could eventually become far cheaper and easier to obtain. Real-world drone technology is a good example of this trend, where tools that were once limited to major militaries have become available to much smaller groups. The biggest issue with the book is that halfway through, a second storyline is introduced that shifts the focus away from Julian's personal story and toward a much broader, more philosophical narrative. The transition feels abrupt, and the novel seems to abandon much of what it had spent the first half building. It felt like Halderman didn't know what he wanted the book to be, and he decided to explore a different angle halfway through. And I think the name of the book also shows that, because despite the title, this book has basically nothing to do with the Forever War. It was more of a marketing decision, I think just designed to attract readers familiar with his most popular work, and it just comes across as misleading. Overall, Forever Peace is filled with a lot of interesting sci-fi ideas, but it fails to deliver a put-together story. 1999, Parable of the Talents by Octavia Butler. So this is a sequel to Parable of the Sower, and is best read after it. The book follows Lauren as she attempts to build a community in a fractured, climate and economically ravaged America. The community is founded on principles outlined in Lauren's religious book, which she wrote herself. Her religious cult is less about religion and more about building a community that can thrive together. The community that she builds does flourish until it's violently destroyed by a Christian nationalist movement. The book's main theme seems to be pointing out the dangers of extremist religious messaging. It's kind of wild that this book features a charismatic figure who becomes president off the slogan, "Make America Great Again," and this president uses religious rhetoric to push his agenda. So you could compare a lot of what's happening in the book to what's happening today, though the world of the book is far more apocalyptic than today. The evils and hypocrisy of those who use religion to get what they want are on full display, and this may rub some people the wrong way, especially since there are some pretty graphic, violent scenes. But considering the real history of how religion has been used to manipulate people, I don't think any of it is unrealistic or out of touch. Where the book felt a little inconsistent to me was in its own depiction of Lauren's religion. The book spends so much time warning us about the dangers of religious extremism and people co-opting movements for their own motives, but then Lauren ends up leading her own religious cult-like community, one that somehow doesn't seem to carry many of the same problems other communities have. I think the problem with religion in general is once a movement gets big enough, usually people will come into that religion or whatever kind of movement it is, and they'll often co-opt it for their own motives. Overall, it's still worth the read, if only for how many things the book predicted. So my final thoughts on the books. Fred Mars and Moving Mars both deal with human colonies beyond Earth, movements towards independence, political infighting, and the challenges of surviving on another world. I think both are kind of too long and boring. You could read The Moon is a Harsh Mistress and get a lot of the same themes in far fewer pages. Forever Peace, plot-wise, is a bit of a jumble. And then there's The Moon and the Sun, which almost had the opposite problem of being too predictable. Honestly, I think you should just check out the author's more popular books, The Forever War and then Dreamsnake. The Terminal Experiments plot around the tech hasn't aged the best, and the book just feels a bit lackluster. Slow River has aged fine, but I'm not sure who wants to read a story that goes back and forth between a lesbian relationship and then how to operate a wastewater treatment plant. The Doomsday Book and Stations of the Tide both feel like they fill a very specific sci-fi niche. The Doomsday Book feels like a sci-fi novel that more casual sci-fi readers might enjoy. It's not my cup of tea, but I do understand why people like it. And then Stations of the Tide feels like something people who are really into the genre might find interesting. Parable of the Talents and Tehanu are, in my opinion, far better than any of the other books of this decade. They're also sequels building on already established worlds, so I sometimes think it's unfair to compare sequels to first installments. Regardless, both are great books, and overall, I'd say these are the books that hold up. If you agree or disagree, let me know in the comments below. I'm reading through all the Nebula winners, and we'll be making a video for each decade. If you enjoyed the video or want to follow along, please like and subscribe.